Welcome back to Factoring Quadratics. This is SQ3, Solving Quadratics number 3. If you missed SQ1 and 2, you might want to go back and check those out so that you're not, you don't have a gap somewhere. Okay, we're actually going to go a little bit out of order. We did factoring a difference to two squares, and we did factoring a trinomial with the EZ method. And there's another kind of trinomial we talked about that had a coefficient in front of that leading term. Well, we're going to skip it and go to factoring by grouping. Now, you use factoring by grouping when you have 4 terms in your quadratic. We looked at 3. There's another 3 that I'm going to come back to, but we're going to do this one first. So let's just grab a problem and let me explain it while we go through it. Okay, we got our first problem. Now, analysis first. We know we need to factor it because we're trying to solve an equation. This is not an equation, it's an expression, but we're just learning to factor first. Now, do you have quadratic? Yes, because I have exponents. So next is to count your terms. How many terms do you have? In this one I have 1, 2, 3, 4 terms. The only alternative I have to factor this is something called factoring by grouping. If you work through that analysis in your head every time, it becomes a lot faster, so you're not having to actually ask yourself the question. You just spot it automatically. Oh, this is 4 terms, need to factor, let me group. Well, when you recall the name of the method, that should help you get started. Okay? Factoring by grouping. So we're going to group these, and let's group them equally, 2 and 2. And let's just make it easy and do the first 2 and the last 2. Now, after you group your numbers, you are going to pull out the greatest common factor from each binomial. So the greatest common factor here is going to be 5x squared. Now when I divide a 5x squared out of this 15x cubed, that's going to give me 3x. When I divide 5x squared out of here, oh, your minus sign, 5x squared out of here, that's just going to be 2. Close the parenthesis, bring down this sign. Now let's look at this group. What's my greatest common factor here? Well, that's going to be a 2. When I divide 2 out of 6x, I get 3x left, the minus sign. 2 out of 4 will leave me 2. Now, you should always be able to redistribute this number into these 2 sets of parentheses and get your original back. So that's how you can check yourself. Once you get to this step, if you will notice, these 2 sets of parentheses match. They must match right here. If these 2 things don't match, you've messed up. You probably didn't pull out the greatest common factor of one of them. Go back. You have to have matching terms right here or this won't work. The next thing you're going to do is take that set of parentheses. That's going to be your greatest common factor between these 2 whole terms right here. This is a whole term and this is a whole term. So now this set of parentheses becomes your greatest common factor. Pull it out. Now what do you have left? Well, here I have 5x squared left. Here I have plus 2 left. This is factored form when you factor by grouping. And if you fold it, you would come up with this again. Okay? Let's do another one. Here's our next problem. We do have 4 terms. We do have an exponent, so it is quadratic. Right? When we counted the 4 terms, that should automatically recall to your mind, oh, I've got to factor by grouping. And the minute you think that word grouping, you know you're going to group the first 2 and the last 2. Okay? Now let's take the greatest common factor out of each binomial. The greatest common factor here is going to be x. When I factor it out, I'm going to get 3x plus 4y minus, oops. Alright, now this one doesn't look like it has a greatest common factor, but it does, 1. You can always pull out a 1. So if I take a 1 out of this Now, the problem is I have a 3x plus 4y here and a 3x minus 4y here. And I can't just bring that down because they won't match. But if I factor out a -1, a -1 from this, it's going to change this sign. So when I factor it out, I get 3x here, -1 out of that. Because remember, you've got to be able to multiply this back into this and get this original. The only way to do that, the only way to get this minus back is to change this to a plus. Okay? Now that you've done that, these two things match. So let's see what our final version is going to be. I'm going to take the set of parentheses, factor it out, both of these. So now I've got that out of here and that out of here. So what's left? Well, I have this x and this -1. And that's going to be factored form. Okay? One more, okay? Okay, we got one more problem. Now, analyzing it, it is quadratic because I have exponents. I have 4 terms. 1, 2, 3, 4. Terms are separated by plus and minus signs. Don't forget that. So I'm going to factor by grouping. So let's just group these two and these two. Alright, the greatest common factor here is x squared. You always want to take any variables that are in common and you take the lowest exponent there is. The lowest exponent of these two is x squared. So pull that out. Now, what would I multiply x squared by to get this original back? Well, I would multiply it by 2x minus, and then x squared into x squared is 1. Okay? Now, watch this minus sign because remember what happened in the last problem. We had to change the sign over here to accommodate for this. Now, if this is a plus sign, you don't have to worry about it. But if it's a minus sign, you've got to change the sign on the other set of parentheses. Alright, the greatest common factor between these two is a 5. So that's going to give me 2x. I'm changing my sign, -1. Notice, once again, my two sets of parentheses match. If they don't match, go back. You messed up. And now my final answer is going to be the set of parentheses, 2x minus 1, times these two numbers that are left over here, x squared minus 5. And just be cautious. Always check these two to see if you have a difference of 2 squares or something that can be factored even further. Always check your remaining factors, your sets of parentheses, and see if you can factor them further. Okay? And there's a worksheet on this. I'll drop a link in the description. You can click on that and get yourself some practice if you want to. See y'all in the next one. Bye.